So this also is fundamentally important. So without a living cell, there is no living virus, to be honest. But these viruses can only multiply inside another living cell of some sort.
I will ask another question also, that there was an article today about, sharing in among our circles, that from the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine, that there was a discussion about this paper about whether the virus can get into water, and then whether you, Professor Malik, share this.
Thank you, Nihal. So, and I have also seen this paper, and indeed, I, took the liberty of analyzing that in detail. So, oh, sorry, hold on. What I will do is, if I can just share my screen again, I have just a few points to make, and I think these are important not just for this particular issue, but in general. I hope you can see my screen now. So I think this is the paper you're talking about. They say risk of SARS coronavirus infection from contaminated water systems. Now, first and foremost, again, I think some of the emails I saw it being mentioned that it's an Oxford paper from the University of Oxford. That is not the case. If you look at this, you can see that this is not University of Oxford. It was commented on by a website at the University of Oxford. So the scientists are not from University of Oxford. Now, there's another very important point, and again, I'm pointing this out because these are not just for this paper, but things that you need to be aware about. So when you look at this paper, you can see that it is online, posted on June 20th, 2020, right? Now, you might, I hope you realize that particularly during this COVID outbreak, people have been posting articles online. There is this server, this medRxiv, where any of you can write anything more or less and post it there, and they will post it. It doesn't mean that it has been peer reviewed. It doesn't mean it has been checked. So what is interesting is it was posted in June, but it is still not published in a scientific journal. So what this means is for 6 months, normally it would have been submitted to a scientific journal, it would have gone through peer review and been published. So when you see that, you already need to be careful. Okay, but let's look at the data. Now, I must also point out that this medRxiv, these rapid publications online is extremely useful because people do publish very quickly, very useful data. But the only thing is, if it is not being accepted by a peer-reviewed journal, you have to be careful. The reader has to be careful and check, right? You can't assume that what they say is true. So let's look at this paper. So they say that we aim to assess the survivability of SARS coronavirus within water systems and using modeling estimations. So it's basically a modeling paper. They have not directly demonstrated presence of live water in water systems, nor have they, for that matter, even done PCR in water systems. So this is purely a modeling paper. They looked at analysis to calculate dilution factor in any contamination that may get into the river system. And then they made various assumptions in terms of how much of infectious virus there may be in the stool, the feces of people, and then also assumptions about if this sewage spills over through some faulty sewage system or whatever into the water supply. And that's basically their whole study is based on those assumptions, right? And then, of course, what is striking is they claim that you may have infectious virus for up to 25 days. Now, again, if you look carefully, the up to 25 days is at 4 degrees centigrade. That is the temperature you get in a fridge, or you may get in Norway. That is not the temperature you get in Sri Lanka. Even if you look at their own data, at say 20 degrees temperature centigrade of water, the estimated survival, even according to their own data, is less than 1 day. And I will show you the data here. So, okay, so this is from their paper, right? So this is at 4 degrees, according to their modeling, yes, it survives for a long time. At 20 degrees, less than 1 day, more than 50% is gone. So this is even according to their data. But then there are some major problems in their assumptions. So they assume that the ratio between a PCR gene copy and infectious virus is 1 to 10, meaning 10 PCR copies is equal to 1 infectious virus, or 1 to 100, or 1 to 1,000. They make three levels of assumption. But in reality, what we and many other people have shown is that it is close to 1 in 1 million. So in that parameter, they are off by a factor of 1,000 to 100,000. Then they assume that the minimal infection dose is 100. In reality, the best estimates now are in the order of 1,000. So another factor, error factor of 10. Now, even if you just multiply the lower error factor by this one, already the estimates are off by a factor of 10,000-fold or up to 1,000,000-fold. So I just make the point that, you know, we really need to be careful when we look particularly at these non-peer-reviewed publications before we jump to conclusions. But having said all that, I mean, I think we do need to be careful about disposal of sewage, because virus, in COVID patients, virus is shed in the stool. And if there is gross direct contamination of water supplies, there could be some concern. But it's not just for COVID. I mean, obviously, if you do have that, there are many other problems that we would be concerned about, you know, hepatitis A, so many other things. Now, this type of risks that they're talking about, and indeed even in their paper, they are not talking about the type of sewage that we have in Sri Lanka, where, except, say, in Colombo, where you have central sewerage system, and now in Kandy, it's just beginning to be rolled out. Most parts of Sri Lanka, what we have is soakage pits. So the feces goes into a soakage pit, and the material has to then seep through the soil before it can get into any water system, right? So during that process, which will take quite a time, the virus gets filtered, the virus is dying all the time, and the risk, I would say, from soakage pit latrines is negligible. But clearly, if you have some major problem, say, I'm not familiar with the sewerage system in Colombo, but if for some reason, you know, it directly unloads into some major water supply, that would be very undesirable, not just for COVID, but for many other things. And I suppose, you know, the other corollary, because I do see many questions also in the chat. So linking this to the burial issue, I just said there is no risk of contamination, I mean, feces from infected people where we know there is virus in the feces, particularly in the early stage of illness, going through soakage pits, going through the soil and getting into the water table, there is no risk. If there's no risk from there, there can also be no risk from burying you know, bodies. Again, you don't bury the body in water. So again, you have the soil that has to be filtered through. There's physical filtration. There's virus inactivation going on during that process. So you can't have a risk with one and not have a risk with the other. So I think I will end there, but I think I just want to make one final point. Coming back to this paper, the problem that these people have, I'm sure their water science is pretty good. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert. I cannot check that part of their study, but I assume that those calculations are good. So they are good water scientists. They may be good geologists. But if you are just a good water scientist or a geologist, but you don't have a good understanding of infectious disease, of virology, and how you control contagious diseases, then you can get into very big, get into very wrong conclusions. So with that, I will end. I will leave Neelika to address the other question, but if you have any other follow-up questions, I'll be happy to address it. Thank you.
Animals transmitting the virus, probably animals getting it first and then transmit it to humans, and also the dead carcasses, the disposition of the dead carcasses, whether the dead carcasses, if they are buried, could that be a mechanism for the transmission of this new SARS-CoV virus to humans in a later date?
Yes. So indeed, some domestic pets can get infected from infected patients, like cats and dogs. Indeed, we were the first to report in Hong Kong that dogs can get infected and then cats can get infected from cases. But neither dogs or cats have been really shown to be a major problem in terms of sustaining transmission and then spilling back to humans. But then, of course, there are other animals that are farmed, like mink, which are farmed for these mink coats. And they are extremely susceptible to infection. And that is why there have been outbreaks in the Netherlands, in Spain, and of course, more recently in Denmark. So millions of minks, 15 million minks were killed because of this uncontrolled outbreak. And from the infected mink, there was transmission back to humans, right? Not from buried mink. This was from the mink in the farms when they were infected. And of course, the people were working there and they gave the infection to the minks. And then from the minks, there was infection of other people. Then, of course, I know there's also been a lot of chat about this burial of 15 million mink, mind you. All right. 15 million mink buried in a fairly limited area of land. And what do you expect? Buried in shallow graves with the decomposition, the carcasses were being pushed up from the soil. And this was, of course, very, very distressing to people to see that and smell it and whatnot. Now, we are not talking about burying humans in that way, right? First and foremost. But what the Danish government is going to do is in May, 5 months from now, they are going to remove and cremate them. Not cremate them now, okay? So in other words, they don't see any major infection risk from these dead mink. Not direct risk unless somebody goes and, deliberately goes and eats something like that or whatever it is, nor any risk to the water table. The problem has been really more an aesthetic and a problem of, the whole, such a huge number of animals buried in a small space, and clearly that is going to cause problems. So there is no question, as far as I know, that, and I'm absolutely certain there is no evidence that there was transmission from the dead mink nor from the buried mink. Over.
Thank you, sir. Neelika, do you have anything else to add to that?
I don't have anything to add. It's just that like these news items are actually misinterpreted by a lot of people and given publicity in a very wrong manner, misinterpreted in social media and leading to a lot of myths. So I think if the colleges, now the College of Community Physicians is a very powerful college, so I think if the colleges can actually have educational activities or when they see all these myths being spread in Sri Lanka, if the colleges can actually educate the public so that these myths are limited, because as I earlier said, I think the myths sometimes do more harm than the COVID pandemic itself. So over to you, Hasit, and everybody, the college, to do something when these things happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neelika.